This video is made possible by the Eliason Group, an Agile consulting service. You can locate the video under Follow Us, then select Recent Videos on YouTube on the agilenewengland.org website.
These guys is a rocket company, mostly former SpaceX employees, that's delivering rockets 100 times faster than SpaceX. They build a new rocket every day and test it. So we're working on some very interesting companies. Lately, I get a lot of questions from people. I did a podcast today with a venture capitalist who said, I thought Scrum came from Agile. And I'm like, does anybody here think Scrum came from Agile? So I had to explain to them, no, that Scrum started in 1993, or we formalized Scrum in 1993, based on Professor Takeuchi Tanaka's those teams building cars at Toyota and Honda, or materials at 3M, which we work with a lot today. And so these teams were working so closely together, they remind us of the game of rugby. We're going to call it Scrum Project Management. And we adopted that. And with that adoption, we pulled the whole background of Lean into Scrum to add to everything we had learned in the software track. And when I pulled Ken Schwaber, Ken was CEO of a project management software company, Waterfall. And in 1995, I pulled Ken in to look at the first Scrum, and I said, Ken, that stuff you're selling, those methodologies, they don't work. Take a look at Scrum, it really works. He says, yeah, you're right. Scrum works and Waterfall doesn't. So I said, well, why don't you sell Scrum? And we came to an agreement that we would write the first paper on Scrum and Ken would start marketing it to the industry. I was still working inside the company as a technology officer. And Ken sent me a famous email, send me everything you have on Scrum. He says, I'm inventing a new process and I want to steal everything I can. I don't want to reinvent anything. So we sent him everything on Scrum. The first Scrum team was doing all the XP engineering practices, and I wanted to be part of Scrum, but Ken argued that we get much faster adoption if we just focused on the team process. And so I said, okay, well then let's let Kent Beck take the engineering practices, but Scrum works best with XP inside. And they were designed together to work together, okay? And at the Agile Manifesto meeting, the only widely deployed processes were Scrum and XP, and the founders of Scrum and XP were there with a bunch of consultants and book authors. So Scrum and XP are the mother and father of Agile, right? A lot of people have no idea where this all came from. Not only that, they were all small talk teams. This all arises out of small talk development, okay? We're still trying to recapture the environment that we had in small talk 20 years ago, and we're still not there yet. Maybe someday we'll get there. Anyway, that's just a little history. Now, one of the problems with Agile these days is that it's the law in the United States that you must be Agile to do a Defense Department IT project. So that means every consultant is proposing Agile. So the government created this Defense Innovation Board that has a lot of very well-known people, the former CEO of Google, probably half the people on that in those pictures there. And they wrote this article called Agile BS. How many of you seen this? Yeah. So some of you, but a lot of you haven't seen it. Just Google Defense Innovation Board. And they said, we're going to have a bunch of questions that when you look at a proposal, can the teams deliver working product every sprint, including the first sprint? If yes, Agile. If no, it goes to the Agile BS bucket. Can the teams update the backlog in a month or less and build new stuff at least every month?
If yes, Agile. If no, Agile Bitbucket. We reject. Okay. Is the entire development and deployment cycle completely Agile? If they have Agile teams with a linear deployment process, that's Agile BS. It should be rejected and go to the Bitbucket. Okay. This would reject more than half the Agile teams in the United States today. We know that just by looking at the standard statement. So there's a huge amount of Agile BS out there. So another thing that most people don't realize is that Scrum is a massive research project that came. All the operational stuff in Scrum is based on fighter pilot training. So I really enjoyed meeting with the Air Force this weekend because that's where all the practice comes from, particularly from John Boyd, the world's greatest fighter pilot, and the guy whose strategy is now used particularly by the Marines. So his strategy has gone into all the war colleges, and it's embedded in Scrum. The theory was developed in medical school when I moved from the Air Force into medical school and was a professor of radiology for 11 years. Because I was doing supercomputing research modeling the human cell. And understanding how a cell goes through state changes in small increments, and understanding complex adaptive systems and evolutionary biology, that is the way Scrum works, okay? It has nothing to do with IT, it has nothing to do with software, and it has nothing to do with any methodology. It has to do with scientific research and understanding how biological systems evolve and move through a design space. And I had about $20 or $30 million in the medical school to invest in this, in computing, and I was pulled into a bank I'm going to talk next, where I had another $20 or $30 million to throw at figuring out Scrum. And this was 10 years before we formalized it, okay? So if you add up all the money that I've had in my personal budget to invest in figuring out Scrum, it's more than $250 million. This is a technological innovation that's had huge investment and has been tested in many different domains for 30 years. Okay. One of the problems that it had to solve, the reason was it took so long and so much money to figure this out, is that it had to solve a hard problem. And that was Brooks' Law. If a project's late and you add more people, it gets later. And in fact, until 2009, there was never a team who would publish data that didn't get slower the bigger the project got. 100% slower the bigger it got. And the reason for that is as you get more and more people involved, this is data on 491 projects, it shows you that if a team has 6 people and the project takes 11 months, if you add 4 people to that team, it will delay it 4 months. And if you add 7 more people to the team, it's still delayed 6 months. Okay? And yet we still have people out there with teams of 15 people. That doesn't scale. So the whole model of Scrum was built around small teams, and we actually published the first paper showing linear scalability, i.e., when you double the number of teams, globally, the production doubles. And when we wrote that paper, we were talking about productivity, but the academic peer reviewers said, you know, productivity is interesting, but this is the first paper ever that showed linear scalability. Now, I used to work in the hardware business, and one of the biggest problems was if you add a process to a system, and now you have 2 processors, you would get twice the output. Yes or no? No, right? Some of you know this. No, never. No one's ever been able to do it in hardware. But we actually can do it with people, with a properly implemented Scrum. It all goes back to what we learned at the medical school. My thesis advisor was Professor John Baylor, at the time the editor of the Journal of the National Cancer Institute, and he came to give a grand rounds talk at the University of Colorado, and what he presented was his paper on mammography that showed that more women were getting cancer from radiation exposure than were getting cured. And that caused a huge uproar. NCI had to create a blue ribbon panel that met for 6 months to determine that Bill was absolutely right. And they changed all the standards. He was not only the head of the National Cancer Institute Journal, he was the guy that was responsible for any paper in the New England Journal of Medicine for 10 years. Baylor had to approve the data or it didn't get published. So this is a leading guy in the field of cancer. And I went up to him after that presentation. I said, Dr. Baylor, you know, I'm just a graduate student. I'm going to spend 5 years writing a doctoral thesis, and I'm really concerned. It's just going to go on the library shelf, gather dust. No one will read it. Anybody got one of those? I know there's a few of them in here. Right? I said, can you help me write something that someone will read? And he said, well, I have a big problem, if you want to work on it. I'm going to send you 300 clinical papers on cancer, human studies, animal studies, tons of charts and graphs, and they're all different. Explain why, and I'll give you your doctoral degree. I said, well, how will they do that? He said, well, you're going to have to model the human cell. You're a mathematician, computer science, and you're going to have to show how the cell changes into a cancer cell, and then grows into a tumor, and then the probability that the patient goes to a clinic and it's a diagnosis, because if they get a diagnosis, it goes to my database at the National Cancer Institute, and I've got 20 years of data on most of the cancers in the United States, and when your cell model gets all the data, that's the definition of done. I said, that sounds like a really hard problem. And he said, well, it's not only hard, but nobody knows what causes cancer. You're going to have to figure that out to be able to do this. I said, well, that sounds impossible. And he said, well, every leading cancer researcher in the world works with me. And we will guide you every step of the way, but we need someone to do the grunt work. Are you willing to do the work? So it sounded like such a great learning opportunity that I just said yes. Then I'm buried in the medical school library for 6 months studying literature. I start writing a program. It takes 6 months to even get it to work. And the first time I run it, those were the days when you had punch cards. Anybody remember that? You got some old folks in here, yeah. I brought it into the operations center, gave them the cards. I went back to the office. All of a sudden, the faculty starts running into the graduate student area like, Sutherland, what did you do? You just burned a third of the computer science budget for the department for the year. One run of that program, you can never run that program again. But what it clearly showed was there are 4 stages to produce a malignant tumor, and the first stage is very often a genetic effect. The other stages are viruses or carcinogens or infections that cause the mitochondria to malfunction, and that's what produces the cancer cell. And if you understand how that works, then you can take a cancer cell and back it up into a normal cell. You can move the cell anywhere in the state space. The same is true of a Scrum team. Okay? So the same model. Scrum is an experiment every day in a daily meeting, and a bigger discussion at the retrospective to try to make the team better. Okay? That's the basis. And technically, the first Scrum team used it to look at the system And in the daily meeting, we would say, what is the simplest change that we could make to this system to move it towards a new future? And then we would run the system and then ask the same question. And if you do that, you actually wind up with a better system 10 times as fast. And I remember we explained this to the architects at Google, and they said, oh, you mean it's all about architecture? Everybody on the team needs to understand the whole architecture of the system and then figure out what we should do and where we should do it, and that could change every day. The same thing is true of the team. What can we do to the architecture of the team today to make the team function better? That's Scrum. Here's what we're teaching in our Scrum course. How many people have fast, easy, and fun Scrum teams? Some, but not very many. How many have slow, hard, painful Scrum teams? Maybe the same number. So these people all think Scrum doesn't work. And these people all think Scrum does work. But actually, if you have small, stable, dedicated teams, if your backlog is really in a ready state, if the teams are collaborating and swarming together, if they have a way to deal with interruptions, if they are constantly improving using the Kaizen, and they finish the sprint early with everything they pulled into the sprint, all teams that do that will be awesome, without exception. So the reason it doesn't work well is because you're specifically doing things breaking. So that's what we're getting clearer and clearer about that, you know. It's not about Agile means you can do anything you want. It's kind of, does football mean that you can get on the football field and do anything you want? No. You will get killed if you will get hurt, you will lose, you will be hard, you will fail. You can't do anything you want. You have to do certain specific things, and you have to do it well. And if you do, the teams will be awesome, okay? So where I learned all this was in medical school, working with the Bell Labs team was giving me tools and technology to do supercomputing, the team that had Kernigan and Ritchie on it. And I learned that, hey, these guys, 4 or 5 teams, one job title, the tooling that they were building was amazing. It would totally transform an environment. So I came out of medical school with that in mind. I was pulled into a bank. They came by one day and they said, Jeff, you guys are using technology, we're using the bank, but we don't know what we're doing. You're the experts. They made me an offer that my wife couldn't refuse. So I wind up in the bank. They're running 150 banks all over North America. And so effectively, I'm vice president for advanced systems, effectively CTO for 150 banks. And as I'm thinking about the new technology strategy, I'm looking at the mainly COBOL programmers working on these huge projects, and all the projects are late. And I notice the managers are running around having more meetings and more reports, and it's making it later. So I go into the CEO's office and say, hey Ron, have you noticed all your projects are late? And he said, yeah. Every day at least 4 CIOs call me up and scream at me. And I said, well, it's not getting better. And I said, in fact, I've gone to one of these Gantt charts that has 1,000 tasks, and I've calculated the probability that one of those will slide and the whole project will be late, and that probability is 0.999999999. They're all going to be late. So he says, well, what should I do? I said, you need a completely different operating model. So I said, that means we need to take a business unit in the bag and run it with a completely different operating system. I said, let's take the worst business unit, the one that's losing the most money. I'll show you how to fix it. He said, well, that'll be a big headache instead of being fun like working on technical strategy. And I said, I don't care, this bank needs to be fixed. He said, okay, you got it. I said, I need everybody, sales, marketing, support, installation, the whole operation. And I pulled them all together. They were running, the unit was running the automated teller host that was connected to all the ATM systems across 150 banks in North America, and also into all the back-end mainframe systems. We had multiple mainframe sites all across the United States. I showed the CEO this book, it was a bestseller at the time. I said, it's going to be based on these principles. And if you read these principles, they're remarkably similar to the Agile Manifesto, right? This is back in 1983. So I got the whole unit together, everybody, salespeople, marketing, small cross-functional teams, 4 to 5 people, just like Bell Labs. We had product management, worked on requirements. I had to come in every Monday morning and prioritize by business value. In fact, the bank sent a really brilliant financial guy in there to help the product marketing guy actually prioritize properly. And I said, everything's going to be done on Friday afternoon. I'm going to train you just like I trained fighter pilots to land a plane at the end of the runway. And I know you're going to screw this up. So just like the fighter pilots, we're going to come back around. We're going to try it again. These F4s were designed to be slammed on the end of the runway, and I'm going to give you a burn down chart to show you where you are on the glide path. This is 1983. We have the burn down chart. So we slammed those on the runway, popped the drag chute. It took them 6 weeks to be able to nail it. But then, within 6 months, they started losing. Costs were 30% higher than revenue. Within 6 months, revenue was 30% higher than cost, 60% swing in margins. The bank says, that is the most profitable business unit in the bank. Here's another $20 million to throw more Scrum. That was the first implementation of what today we call Scrum at Scale. So in recent years, people have started asking me to write this down, and particularly the people at Intel, they said, you know, at Intel we've learned that nothing scales unless it's fractal in nature. You can't put 4 billion chips, 4 billion transistors on a chip and scale it without having every component have the same model and API as every other component. It needs to be like the internet. And all these scaling frameworks people are talking about are not like the internet. They're not fractal, and they don't scale. You need to write it down. They cornered me in a conference. And the Scrum Alliance came to me and said, we have partners with multiple scaling framework people, but it's not what we want. We want one that can take a whole organization and get the business agile. We want one that's open source. We want one that our Scrum Masters and trainers can participate in the evolution. And they spent a year, their lawyers spent a year figuring out with our lawyers how that would work. And in April of this year, we finally launched a joint venture on Scrum at Scale. So we have a guide, it's open source, it's being evolved by the trainers. Basically, it's a meta framework, it's non-prescriptive. It says these are the pieces that the Scrum Masters need to worry about, and these are the pieces that the product owner is going to worry about. And what we need to do is go in and look at what the organization is doing and figure out how to tune that up so it goes really fast. And if it works, if teams can get twice the work in half the time, for a team, we should get twice the work in half the time and scale, right? Otherwise, it doesn't scale. So that's the model for the Scrum at Scale. So we're working on, a lot of companies do this. We typically send a couple of coaches in to look at the challenges, then work with the senior management We want them to prioritize everything and select some Agile initiatives. We want to start small. We want a leadership team that's responsible for creating an Agile bubble in the organization that's run as a separate operating unit, just like we did at the bank. We also want a leadership team that is prioritizing everything. While we're building out a backlog, we want to train everybody, and then we want to form the teams around the backlog to maximize production. And the sets of teams we form, we want them to be a release team. They're responsible for deploy every sprint or having a potentially shippable product every sprint or more often, okay? Not these separate release teams. And we want to get that working so we now have a reference model that we can scale by in rolling waves, roll that out across an organization. We want them delivering every sprint. At least every quarter, we want to go back to the enterprise backlog, reprioritize everything, expand the Agile initiatives, rinse and repeat until the whole organization is Scrum. And we do it with a minimal viable bureaucracy. There's only 3 special Scrum teams. There's nothing that's not Scrum. The team of teams that has a scaled daily Scrum that makes sure a set of teams can deliver a fully integrated product at the end of a sprint or more often. A leadership team that is responsible for maintaining, supporting, and enhancing that Agile piece of the organization. And an executive meta Scrum, which is responsible for prioritizing everything and then updating those priorities on a regular basis. Okay? A lot of organizations, everything's priority 1. Does anybody have one of those? Guess what? That doesn't scale. You will never scale in that environment. Not only that, Professor Carter at Harvard says he has never seen a successful, sustainable Agile transformation without a separating operating unit that has Agile leadership. So most of the so-called scale Scrums out there are the walking dead waiting to fail. Because they still have waterfall management running the operation. We've got a bunch of nods here. Okay? So what I'm talking about is not optional if you want to build a sustainable Agile organization. We'll talk about companies that have done that. On the other hand, you can start. Last year I had a team at Toyota. We actually are, we have a team in Japan at the Toyota Research Group, Scrumming in Toyota's higher research group. The Hoshin, which is the priorities from the corporate level, coming down. Number 7 is get Agile. And last year they pulled us into Toyota America to work mainly with the IT team, a little bit with the assembly line people. First thing we do is get them to prioritize everything, every major initiative in Toyota America. There were 324. And then we said, okay, what we want to do is select one or more Agile initiatives at the top of that list. And the first one they agreed we need to do something about was a system that pays commissions to dealers who sell Toyotas. Pretty important system. They had 200 people working on it for 5 years with nothing delivered. So we said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to look at those 200 people, figure out who we need, and we selected 20 people, including a really strong product owner. We implemented Scrum at Scale. In 6 months, they delivered. Okay, so think about that. 20 people, 6 months, compared to 200 people, 5 years delivering nothing. What's the relative performance? Infinitely faster. We're not talking about twice the work at half the time. We're talking about 1,000 times the work at 1,000th of the time. We're talking about more than that. Okay? It is unbelievable what's going on out there. Unbelievable. So we've been working with the leadership at Bain Consulting, a couple of Harvard Business Review papers. We wrote one on Scrum and Scale, and in there, or Agile and Scale, and in there it talks about how do you get 100 teams going 100 times faster than one team, right? That's what we're talking about. And how do we take the whole business and make it agile? So it's just not just about the teams, it's about the performance of the teams. And that performance has to work even if the teams are scattered all over the world. And also, the Scrum needs to move across the entire organization to make it actually work, to actually scale and be sustainable. And the guys at Intel pointed out, you need a scale-free architecture. Well, if you understand biology, which is where I spent most of my time, there are many scale-free architectures in biology. You're a good example. How many cells do you have in your body? Okay?
Many.
Many, yeah. Actually, it's a hard number to figure out, but a recent paper was published where they figured out on the average you have 37 trillion cells. And they're all working well enough at scale that you're here, most of you are still awake, some of you are even paying attention. So if that works, we should be able to get 37 trillion people in a Scrum and make it work. Right? Let me give you an example of the kind of people we work with. Maersk is the largest shipping company in the world. A few years ago, half of their company was oil, and whenever the oil price went down below $40 a barrel, they started losing money. The other half of the organization was shipping containers, and they needed to get $1,400 a container, but they were only getting paid at on the average $600 a container. So what do you do when that happens? First of all, you bust up the company, separated the oil, got new CEOs, and we're going to get it agile. They called me up. Got to get agile. So I go in and I think, well, how will I talk to the senior management of Maersk? They have nothing to do with software. They ship stuff. And I thought, I think I'll talk to them about Moneyball. Has anybody read the book or seen the movie Moneyball?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Maybe that they can relate to that, right? For those who haven't read the book, it's about the Oakland A's. They were losing most of their games, so they hired a statistician, and the statistician figured out that most of the runs were scored by people who just managed to get to first base. The heavy hitters scored some of them, but not most of them, and they were very expensive. So the statistician said, just hire people that get to first base. Within a year, they were number 2 in the league in wins of games, and their salaries were significantly less than average. So I said, what I need to do is go in and talk about the money ball of Scrum. So here's the money ball of Scrum. What we want to do when we go into any organization is prioritize everything that the enterprise is doing. And every time we do that, it doesn't matter whether it's GE, Toyota, 3M, we always find the bottom 30% of projects are stuff that shouldn't be done. And as soon as you actually get the ordering and everybody sees it, it's obvious, everybody says it. One IT services company with about 1,000 people did this, and the bottom 30% was all Windows 7 support, and almost everybody had gone to Windows 10. In one afternoon, they freed up 300 people. I can't tell you how many management teams tell me, you don't have enough people to get stuff done. Anybody in a company like that? And you meet for one day, and now a third of the people are free to do useful stuff. Then you go to the remainder, and we've known for years in software, 2/3 of the features are never going to be used, or very rarely used by the end user. Right? It turns out to be true in hardware. Working on all these hard companies. It's true in the oil companies. is true in the beverage company. It is true everywhere. Okay? So the product owners have to figure out how to not build this stuff. So if you can get a good product owner team, the first day you can free up a third of the people. And with a good backlog creation, you can eliminate at least half of this. Now you've got half of the people freed up in the company to do something useful. The only thing left is how do you get the team performing, which is where we do most of the work, right? How do we get the Scrum teams working? Well, lately I've been working with researchers on process efficiency. You know, I had a lot of trouble with the Toyota management, so I told my team, process efficiency is the metric they use. It's a lean metric. The definition of lean means it's more than 25%. And you should ask them to figure out what it is and how they're going to improve it. It's the Toyota way. So we forced them to do that, and the first one we figured out was 0.25%. And the management was furious with me. They said, Sutherland, you made us look bad, and you don't understand the political situation here at Toyota. I said, you made me look bad. I use Toyota as an example, and you guys are a disgrace. Fire me if you want, but I am not stopping talking about this. Your job is to measure process efficiency and improve it. That is the Toyota way. That is the DNA of the company, and you need to start doing it. So they backed off, and then we went in and did these things, 200 people, 20, and then started delivering. So they saw what could be done really quickly. But it turns out that most Scrum teams, like we went into GE is the only company that I've met that knows the process efficiency of a Scrum team. And you can calculate it. How many are using Jira? Almost everybody. Okay, the data is sitting there in Jira. Sitting there, but you're not looking at it. But at GE, they look at it. So if a story could be done in a day, but it takes 20 days to get moved to done, 1 over 20 is 5%. That's the process efficiency of that story. So we want to look at the average process efficiency of a story in Jira. And some of you will be great. If you're doing continuous deployment, you'll probably find it's quite high. But if you're not, you're going to be down to 5 or 10%, just like General Electric. Now it turns out that you can fix that in 3 days. So I told this to an Indian team I was coaching remotely on a Thursday. It's Thursday, right? I said, put in your Scrum tool, since the data is there, make it calculate and print it on the screen when you look at the tool, the running process efficiency. They came in Monday, start the sprint, it was 10%. On Wednesday, it was 80%. And on Friday morning, they called me up and said, we have no more backlog, it's all done. We're 2 weeks sprint. We don't know what to do, we're going to have to go talk to management. So this can be fixed so fast by people who know what they're doing, but you have to look at the data. And I said, how did you fix that so fast? They said, oh, we found out we've got 3 people to work on a story. Boom. Process efficiency just escalated. So they were doing twice the work in half the time. It only took them 3 days. So this is not rocket science. It's really simple. It only takes 3 days to make it work. But you have to look at the data and you have to make it go up. Now, Amazon is pretty good at this. I was out there doing some training for the management last year. And I said, how many of your teams are awesome? They said, only 5%. So only 5% of their teams are awesome. But they have 3,300 Scrum teams delivering a new feature every second live. And now that means any domain they go into, it's game over. I was in Germany recently, and the biggest bank in Germany had their strategy team in I run Scrum Master courses, but they send all the management. Okay? Companies that really want to get Agile, they know the management needs to understand that. So they send me to the Certified Scrum Master course. So I have the strategy team for the bank. They say Amazon is doing loans in Germany. They can calculate the risk on a loan in 3 seconds. They can commit to a loan in 3 minutes. It takes us 3 weeks. It's game over. There is absolutely no way we are ever going to compete. We are implementing as many startups as fast as possible to figure out if there's something that we can do that can enable us to survive. So what I'm saying tonight is doing what I'm talking about is really simple. It only takes 3 days to get one team working properly. You can get lots of teams working properly in a few months. And if you don't do it, you could get Amazon. Either that or Maersk. I said, who are you worried about? Well, they said first, Amazon. Number one, Amazon. You're either going to get Amazon, or number two, Uber. We're going to get Uberized. I was talking to a CIO in Amsterdam recently of a FedEx competitor. He said he's lost all his business in New York for local shipping to Uber. 100%. We're not talking about loss of market share. We're talking about no market share, right? That's what happens when you get people that really know how to be agile coming into your domain. One of the interesting things about Amazon is the management didn't support Scrum. But Bezos has these crazy ideas that a team should be able to be fed by 2 pieces. We're not going to have any teams that take more than 2 pieces to feed them. Not only that, everybody should deliver. If you don't deliver, you're out of here. No tolerance for not having shippable product. And don't mess with engineering, let them figure it out. And just with that simple kind of air cover, they built one of the best Scrum organizations in the world. I was at a management meeting last week. We were talking about communication. I said, well, we don't want much communication. Bezos said, communication is terrible. If you have to have more communication, that doesn't scale. So that forced the teams to be more and more autonomous, build out a microservice architecture where the automation takes care of most of the testing and the communication is minimized. And Scrum is structured itself. The whole structure of small teams scaling through a Scrum of Scrums is designed to minimize the communication pathways that Fred Brooks talked about cause waterfall failure. So a lot of this is counterintuitive. The management was shocked that I was talking to them. We had to spend half an hour talking about why less communication is better. The other thing that Amazon does, and David Rico did a great study recently on what is the return on investment for totally automated testing and deployment. Return on investment is 72,900%. So, the bank would say, well, we have so many legacy systems, this would be too hard for us. But Amazon is automating all that stuff, and for every buck they spend, they get 7,290 bucks back. And now they're coming in and they're gutting the bank. So it's like management not being awake is like the problem, right? Well, when I was at the Air Force, I just had to talk about our second favorite customer. Our most favorite is the rocket company. The reason that they're so cool is not only they build with a rocket every day, but the CEO is a Scrum fanatic. He built his whole building with Scrum pods. Every single person in the organization is on the Scrum team. So he's actually implementing Scrum at scale to build rockets. But Saab has done the same thing on a larger scale. So the Saab Griffin is built by Scrum teams. Its price is 20% of the price of the competition. So we know they're doing twice the work in half the time, right? If you do that, your price is 25% or less than the competition. And Aviation Week says it's the best airplane in the business. So the quality is higher than any other competitor. Their cost is 20%. And the reason is they use Scrum to deliver a new release of the airplane every 6 months, and it's faster, lighter, and cheaper, just like their computer. That's what Amazon is doing. I had dinner with the head of Amazon Global Services in Houston recently. Wanted to go out and have a dinner. He says, I really love working at Amazon. He says, you know, I go into a customer and I say, you know that those AWS services that cost you $500,000 5 years ago, today, $20,000. Because Amazon not only does twice the work in half the time, it's getting better and better all the time. And he says, my competitors at Microsoft, they come in, you know that services that cost you $500,000 five years ago? Guess what? It's going to cost you more than $1 million this year. Right? So he says, I love my job. We're making the world a better place. So anyway, I talked to the Air Force. We have a paper on this. It's on the website, scruminc.com. One of the fascinating things about Saab is, you know, a lot of the hardware guys we talked to said, oh, Scrum will never work in hardware. The Saab guys just, they think that's ridiculous. They laugh. They say all hardware is software. Everything we do is simulated in software. We do not build anything that does not work in the simulation. The same is true with Autodesk across the street. Is the headquarters for the Autodesk people that build skyscrapers. Everything, including wind tunnel testing on many, if not most, of the skyscrapers in the world, is done in software on the computer before a single hole is dug. So all hardware is software. At Saab, every person has a simulation on the desktop, and they can simulate anything. What happens if a bird flies into the wing? What happens if a valve breaks or a pump breaks? All of that everybody can test every day. And here's a typical Scrum world. These are guys that are working on the cockpit. And notice, how big is the team? 5 people. Get the team size right. Their Scrum teams meet every morning at 7:30. It's really a cool place to work. They said the only place that has a chance of being better is Google. And these guys love it so much, they just, can we come in and work on weekends? Now, one of the things that they have fixed is this past summer, Jim Johnson, the CEO of the Standish Group, was down in the Cape. He lives down there. He said, Jeff, let's have coffee. I want to show you my latest chaos report. And he says, I've spent 3 years trying to figure out how Scrum works. And what I figured out is that it's all about decision latency. Because after I analyzed my 50,000 project sets, each with 8 to 25 projects, I found that the most important thing to make projects successful, even more important than Agile, is how long does it take to make a decision? And if the decision time is less than an hour, the success rate is 68% on all these projects. And that is higher than Agile teams, way higher than Agile teams. And if the decision time is more than 5 hours, the success rate is 18%, which is lower than waterfall. So he says that is the key. So if the Scrum is implemented so that it pushes decisions down to the team, they can make decisions in 10 minutes. If the product owner is there to respond to any questions, decisions can turn around in an hour. And if the leadership team is meeting every day, they can fix any major problems every day. And the whole organization can get this decision time down on the average around an hour. And that's what they do at SOP. 7:30 they meet, daily Scrum, 7:45, scale daily Scrum, Scrums, 8 o'clock, Scrums, 8:15, Scrums. And 8:30, the executive action team, which for a company is totally Scrum, is the senior management team. 15 minutes every day. So they are quite an awesome place. This is the test pilot for the first flight of the Gripen E, which they had to make the fuselage bigger to put a bigger
When
engine
we're
in
letting
it.
go of the brakes and the aircraft start to accelerate, and specifically when we rotate and lift off for the first time. Those first couple of seconds in airborne will be great.
During that rotation, just feeling of getting airborne and actually looking outside and just to confirm that we are flying. It was undescribable magic.
So they've done a great job of representing Scrum in the end. You know, I really appreciate them. People ask me, how do you feel about Scrum in the world? And because of my private background, I really feel good about them. And one of the things they're not doing, at the Scrum Alliance, actually the last two gatherings, I had a presentation like this with even bigger, and I asked, how many of you are doing Scrum down in the trenches? And the waterfall management is saying, that's where it goes. Guys in the trenches, they run faster. We want all our waterfall reports up in the corner office. How many of you are in that situation? Better than the Scrum Alliance. At the Scrum Alliance, it's 100%. And what Professor Carter says is that does not work long-term, so that's going to have to change. When I was at the Air Force, I quoted John Board, who wrote Greatest Fighter Power. He says, they don't even look at the goddamn bottom up. How can they decide what's going to be top down? Unless you understand what's bottom up. So he's telling the military they just completely screwed up. He caused a lot of trouble for the military, and it's actually changed the military strategy. That's what needs to happen in business. So the organizations that have sustainable, the management has moved to the side supporting the Agile implementation. The teams are driven by the product owner organization. and the organization is easily refactored to maximize production. I had a funny experience at Adobe. I was giving a talk. The senior manager was sitting in the back of the room, and at the end of the talk he says, "What's the role of manager in Scrum?" And I said, "Well, is Adobe organized to maximize the delivery of production software to the market?" And he said, "No." And I said, well, that's your job, is to make that happen. And he said, well, that's a full-time job. I said, well, what else are you doing? Aren't they paying you to do that? He said, all right, I get it. I know what I need to do. So here's the Agile journey. Okay? You start off the average waterfall team. We want to do twice the work in half the time. Recently working with Scalability, and in less than a year, and this was really interesting because this was a multi-billion-dollar SAP deployment, global. And SAP has these SAP function points. So we can measure velocity totally independent of the team. You know, SAP function point delivery went up 11x with 30 teams in less than a year in an oil company. Most of you in software, that should be easier. Right? But the amazing thing to me is that division head at Intel wrote me an email yesterday. He says, "Jeff, the data we have at Intel is amazing. I have 500 teams, and we can show clearly that they're going 18 times faster than they were when we started 10 years ago." And I was at the Harvard Business School a couple of weeks ago, and the senior advisor to the Abu Dhabi Sovereign Wealth Fund told me the CEO of the wealth fund is going to put $250 billion into chip manufacturing. You know, they're diversifying out of oil. And I said, well, you better give that guy the book because this is his competition, right? He said, give me one right away, sign it. Going to the Abu Dhabi Sovereign Fund. So it's from a scale where we're actually doing a train the trainer all week next week. And at the end of the week, next Thursday, Friday, we have a public training for anyone. And you'll be there. We'll have 12 trainers that I'm training leading that 2-day course. So it'll be a great opportunity for anybody that's interested in this. 4 of them are the 4 leading scaling people for IBM in Europe. These guys have been certified in SAFe, Less, DAD, every framework for years. They've said, we decided on Scrum at Scale. We're going to roll it out to 400,000 IBM consultants. We need to be certified trainers. So if you want to come and be trained by them and me on Thursday and Friday next week, feel free to join us. What we do is we build a heat map where every column is an organization. And the rows are the components of Scrum at Scale. And then we can look at what's going on and how we prioritize tuning up that organization. And begin to build a transition plan that really works. So we're doing Scrum at Scale all over the world. By the end of next week, we'll have about 100 trainers. Some of you may also be interested in training teams. One of the problems was, we've been asked, okay, Deutsche Telekom said, we have 10,000 people, we need to train them all at once. Can you do that? Well, we can only do that with online training. So we built a 8-hour, 1-day course that every component is tested. At the end, the team member gets certification. You can scale really fast with this kind of training. And the components are the same as we do in our Certified Scrum Master training by the same people. But it's a package in the way that the team can really absorb. So, They told me I had till 8:05, and it is exactly 8:05.
It's time for question and answers.
Yeah. David, you got a question?
Thank you, great talk. You were talking about wanting to apply Scrum to fields other than software, and you were talking about minimum viable bureaucracy. I was wondering if you've thought about or had any experience in applying this to government operations, to make the government of the United States or Massachusetts use Scrum as the way it does business.
Well, we certainly have the IT organization in Massachusetts. We've trained hundreds of them. So in that aspect, running the government itself, there's actually 4 countries that have talked to me about the country should be run by Scrum. The UK, Belgium, Sweden, there's one other country. And there are cities that have asked me if I can come help us run a city with Scrum. So it definitely can be used with and we have one of our certified Scrum at Scale trainers works only with government. So in the government, you get massive effects. In Denmark, they say anytime you do Scrum, and this is mainly in IT projects I'm talking about, the cost is, or the production is 10 to 20 times faster. He said it's completely beyond anything. In a commercial company, they don't tolerate the level of waste you have in government. The waste and inefficiency in government is unbelievable. And Scrum can eliminate a huge amount of it just by making everything visible.
Can you talk at all about Scrum in non-IT parts of government, in, legislation or
Yes, many of
executive
the,
functions?
some of the groups I talked to are really working in legislation or regulations, regulatory bodies. How do we use Scrum where the product is a new regulation or a new law? And, the IT people overcomplexify things, Writing a law means you have to do a whole bunch of things, a whole bunch of little projects, have a whole bunch of meetings, and then you have to package it all together and then deliver something, and then iterate on it. It's the same as a piece of software. Except it's easier because we don't have the engineers, talking about how hard it is. And gold plating and over engineering the components, right? So it's just the same.
Jeff, it's good to see you again, Norman Doust. On an early slide, you had a list of things showing the good Scrum teams and the bad Scrum teams and the ones there. I'm wondering, how do those relate to Ivar Jakobsen's essence practices there? Are they just
That's a really good question
practices?
because 2 years ago, Ivar, I'm in Europe regularly, he said, I want to get together. We met in a bar in Amsterdam, and he said, we really should be working together. For those who may not know Ivar, he invented use cases, he invented the rational unified process. And he said, we would like to build a set of essence cards. Well, first of all, he said, we are the biggest safe provider in Europe. His organization is the biggest safe provider in Europe. And he said, safe doesn't work without good Scrum. We want to have a set of essence cards. These essence cards are the OMG global standard for defining methodologies. Okay, so we now have a set of essence cards that is the international standard definition of Scrum that is based on and totally consistent with the Scrum Guide. And I'm using them in every course now. The other thing that Ivar said is that, Dean Leffingwell was the salesperson for Rupp. Dean Leffingwell was an incredibly good marketing guy. But the problem with Rupp is it got more and more heavyweight, and then it fell over. So he said, I need more than one thing that my business is dependent on. Can't just be safe. And also in parts of the organization, particularly the leadership, you can't show the safe framework to the senior executive team and tell them to implement it. It doesn't work. So for leadership training, and also for certain organizations, they are working in government. If you're working with people building regulations and stuff like that, the safe framework is totally inappropriate. You have to have a different way of describing it. and making it work. So he says, that reason, not only should we do essence cards for Scrum, we have almost finished the essence cards for Scrum at Scale. And 2 of their SAFE consultants are now certified Scrum at Scale trainers. And in a couple of months, I'll be going over there to co-train Scrum at Scale classes with them. So Ivar and I are actually working quite, almost every week he calls me up and wants to do stuff. Why aren't we doing more? So it's fascinating.
That's great, thank you.
What I've heard often in implementing processes and so on is source of resistance. Either you got to have top management on board, and if you don't, never mind. Or you could have top on board and the people doing it on board, but you get resistance from the middle. And where do you find more of the resistance, and how do you deal with this? Is you focus on the top, focus on the middle, focus on both of them, or where do you find the legacy resistance when you try to implement? Or none of the above, and these stories aren't true?
Well, Amazon is a great example of where it's totally bottom up. But the leadership did not mess it up. So it can work that way. But the leadership has to have the right mental attitude about how to get really highly productive organizations. In general, for the corporations we're working with today, the leadership of most companies today has figured out we've got to get agile. So Schlumberger, the CIO of Schlumberger, called me up last year. He said, we've got $1 billion into this SAP implementation. It looks like $2 more billion. We got to do something. We've spent $100 million with IBM and Accenture to try to fix this, to get agile. It's not working. He said, I read your book twice a work and half the time. I'm calling you as a last resort. Can you help? They deployed last week, a year later. And in the first 5 months, they saved $30 million in development costs. And they cut those extra $2 billion they were going to spend, they cut that to probably under $200 million by implementing Scrum at Scale. So that never would have happened if the leadership wasn't ready to get agile. Because it's pretty easy to boot up the teams, but today you hit a glass ceiling. Teams can go so far and then bang, they can't go any further unless the leadership. And in most companies, the middle management is fearful for their jobs. What are they going to do? The best case that I've read about this is not a Scrum case study, but in the Harvard Business Review last month, they talked about this Chinese company where the CEO says, I'm building the internet organization of the future. They build mainly appliances, household appliances, air conditioners, stuff like that. I've created 4,000 independent business units. Every manager has 10 to 15 people in a business unit, and they sink or swim on their own. They're totally autonomous. Above them, I have a set of platform managers that are like product owners. They have no authority over any of the business units. The business units can either work together or work with other third parties, but these product owner type people try to coordinate business units and show them a way that they can work together. And then you've got the CEO over them. So he's deployed all of the middle management to the front line. I thought that was a really clever solution to the problem, because now every manager has to sink or swim on a business working with 15 people or less. So now they're effectively some kind of Scrum Master, right? So what are other solutions that are, most companies are not ready to do that yet. But I know Pegasystems locally here, we went in there, we said, okay, we're going to implement Scrum at Scale, we're going to do 6 teams. I'm only bringing coaches in for 6 teams. We started scrumming at the end of July 2009, and September 2nd, every person in India and the United States was doing Scrum. Hundreds of people in the United States and many more in India. So it only takes two months to go from no Scrum at all to Scrum everywhere. But again, it was the leadership saying, we have to go. And what the leadership said was, you have job security as a manager, but you need to help us figure out what your role is to actually contribute to the Agile transformation. And he was very clear, do not get in the way. And so nobody did, and in 2 months it was done. It was a spontaneous eruption of Scrum. It was unbelievable. So that shows how fast it can go with good leadership. So I would say, in general, I said at Scrum Alliance, 100% say they have waterfall management. That is really the glass ceiling. If we can open up those management teams so they can really go, that will really transform things. The management has to be really clear about the direction. In many of the companies I work with, for example, I spent a week at BMW last year. I spent a lot of time with the CIO. They're moving 4,000 people in IT to Scrum, and then they're going to roll it right onto the assembly. So again, Scrum is going to be everything, not just IT. And I was amazed at his vision, but I also talked to his executive team and their knowledge about how to do this and what needs to be done. But when I went down and talked to the teams, and I had some of them in training, they were like, well, we're not sure they really mean that. Okay, so there's this disconnect. The leadership can have a great vision, a great story, but they're not down there going to sprint reviews, they're not walking around every day, watching what people do, and patting them on the back for moving in the right direction. So the people think, wow, they're not serious. So the organization will not go. You need not only leadership that understands Agile, but they have to actually be Agile and go, as Taiichi Ohno said, go to the Gemba. They're going to be there every day watching what's going on.
First of all, thank you very much. You once again cramped up my brain with some new ideas. Thank you. I also want to know, Steve Jennings' new book, At the Age of Agile, he gets into a lot of the maladies that we have dealing with the reward and the structural integrity of the traditional manner structure. Can you share, because I know you also, can you share approaches you did to help the management restructure the way it saw itself rewarded and what it saw as its goals?
Well, the incentive plans in most organizations are set up so that Agile cannot work. And so I was on a panel in Germany with the CEO of Bosch, the big auto parts company, and he was just on the panel. And he went back, and 3 weeks later, all individual bonuses were gone worldwide. So that's probably the first thing that needs to happen. And you don't need to go to Scrum training for that. But he said, clearly, individual incentives are going to cause my managers to compete with one another, and that's going to lower the global revenue of the company. We can't have that. And so he immediately fixed it. That's not hard to understand. And at 3M, one of the largest divisions that we worked with, it was very fortunate that the head of HR stepped up right away and said, I want to be part of the Agile leadership team. HR can help tremendously because we saw right away we have to change incentives, we have to change job descriptions, we have to change space, we have to change the way we do performance appraisals. All these things need to be fixed, and HR needs to lead the charge. And he runs HR as a Scrum team. So if you're blessed with an Agile HR director, that can help a lot because they can really fix the management infrastructure.
Thank you, guys. I think let's finish the business of the day, and then Jeff will be around. We can continue the conversation. Jeff, thank you very much.
Thank you.